Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Matthews. I'm a professor in the anthropology department at Monclair State. I just want to say I'm super proud of Will and Brianna for their presentations, for their willingness to speak to you guys as a group of avocational professional archaeologists. I think they did an outstanding job. I hope you agree with me. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the field school site and community that we're going to be focused on this summer. We're going to be, we feel fortunate to be able to run a field school. It seems that we're in a position, given the pandemic, to do so safely. And we'll be out there from May 24th to June 24th. I will say this again, but people are welcome to come by and see what we're doing, see what we're finding, if making a trip to Paramus is something that's reasonable for you all. So the focus of this project is a community called Dunkerhook, which you can see is circled on this 1902 map. Dunkerhook is currently still the name of the road. The Dunkerhook Road, which I'm tracing here, was established as a road in the 18th century, and it connected Paramus Road here, and it's sort of a back way into Farallon over here, because you have to cross over the Saddle River, and there were very few crossings. So this was the purpose here was to make that connection. And then over time, over the course of the late 18th and early 19th century, it appears that the community transitioned to become the site of an African-American community of a handful of households that persisted living here until the early 20th century. So the site really has two phases. See if I can move this forward. No, that's not going to let me move it forward either. Oh, there it is. Let me go back. Just briefly, this is more information than you need for right now, but essentially in the 18th century, we're not entirely sure there were African-Americans living in the households that were constructed on Dunkerhook Road. We're not even sure how many houses were there. It could be one, it could be two. We don't think there was more than that based on later evidence. But around the turn of the 19th century, it appears that the Zabriskie family, who were the owners of the property, went through a series of deaths by which younger generations replaced older generations, and eventually moved to the Zabriskie family manor house on Paramus Road, leaving the house and territory along Dunkerhook behind, and allowing therefore their laboring force, which were Black laborers, to move into these homes. We know they're there by 1840, and they're probably there as early as the 1820s, specifically related to this 1819 date. We have some evidence that these folks were formerly enslaved, starting with this. This is an inventory from 1813 of Christian Zabriskie, which recorded that he was the owner of 7 slaves, as you can see highlighted here. We don't have any names from this document, but later documents do help us out with that, and I'll mention that in a second. This is the Coastal Survey map from 1840. It shows that the Dunkerhook Road is in place, and a couple of little structures here, and this would have been the Zabriskie home here, and you can see homes up and down Paramus Road, some of which are still there, others are not, but nevertheless, a couple here along Dunkerhook. And by this time, we're certain that there are African-Americans living here, partially because the census tells us so. John Stewart, Samuel Bennett in 1840 are recorded as living side by side in Paramus in this area. And you can see there are no white people in their households in these initial columns, but it's two entirely Black homes. And we're pretty sure that Samuel Bennett is the same individual who was recorded in the Bergen County manumission book in 1831 as having been freed by Cornelius Zabriskie. So Samuel Bennett, at least, is someone we're fairly confident was born into slavery, was manumitted, and ended up establishing a home as a free person of color in the 1830s along Dunkerhook Road. Later census data show that the community grew. We still have Samuel Bennett and it's Jack Stewart here. And then other families are Benjamin Stewart and Harry Cisco. So at least 4 households in 1850, additional households in 1860, and without getting into too many of the details, a Black community is represented in this area if not specifically identified as living on Dunkerhook Road, but at least in the area, unnamed location, all the way up until the 1920 census, when the last of the Black families are represented by 2 single individuals, and all the other households on Dunkerhook are occupied by immigrant white families. So, and after that, there are no more Black folks living on Dunkerhook. So that's our time frame for the archaeology of looking at the African-American component, is from the 1820s or 30s up until the 1920s. And so we're very interested in recovering archaeological data that will connect to these families and to this community to help us understand it a little bit more. Further data that we can share. This is an 1867 map, again, showing Dunkerhook Road, a handful of households. This one, and the Wessels and the Boards, to our knowledge, the African-Americans along here never owned the property. It was always owned by the Zabriskie family and their descendants. And the Wessels is the married name of Cornelius Zabriskie's daughter. We think this structure, though, could have been based on this next map, a AME Zion Church, which would be an interesting find to add to the story of the site. I mean, we're confident that there was a church there. We're just not entirely sure, because you look very carefully. I'm sorry, this is a little blurry. This map shows the church building around the corner. I'll go back one, around the corner. And this map shows a building here that is before the corner. So we're not entirely sure. But our field plan is to leave this area entirely alone until we can do ground penetrating radar or other sort of non-invasive techniques in case there are burials there that we would rather not disturb, of course. And just moving ahead, let me come back to my notes so I haven't missed anything. So we know that the families lived there up until the turn of the 20th century. We know that the church was there. The church was granted property, a 30 by 60 foot plot of land by Catherine Wessels, who was Cornelius Zabriskie's daughter. Other documents that describe the community describe bush meetings, camp meetings, and necktie parties taking place in Dunkerhook. And so it's a relatively, not outstandingly well-documented community, but it's in the records. And you can see here a school picture from 1898 showing the local school with a very, Black and white student body represented, all snugged up together there. And you can see this shows us the Stewarts and Watsons, and I think the Watsons is a mistake. I think they would be the Bennetts, which were 2 of the families that lived there. And so these are some of the kids that would have been living on Dunkerhook at the time, around the end of the 19th century, which is obviously a wonderful resource for us in doing the research. One of the matriarchs of the family was a woman named Catherine Bennett, who died in 1911. And in her obituary, she was described as a founding member of the church and a midwife who assisted in at least 650 births for both Black and white families. She read widely and was knowledgeable of not only medicine, but of agriculture, horticulture, and politics. So obviously a very interesting character and someone we're excited to learn more about as we do more research. As the community, after the community disappeared, and this suggests the church was burned in 1932 in Bogart's History of Paramus. We don't know where he gets that information, other than it's probably something people understood. But after the community disappeared, there's sort of a moment where these old houses, this is one of the houses that stood on Dunkerhook, were understood to be slave quarters, and that the people who lived there were enslaved. We do not think that is the case at all, but you can see the sort of the association of African-American people with slavery being kind of a historical mistake that gets made, not only here, but in lots of different places. And then another sort of unfortunate story, this one's the true tragedy of the site. Some of you may remember about 10 years ago, there was an effort to save one of the houses on Dunkerhook Road. This was that house. And community members and members of the Bergen County Historical Society worked extremely hard to obtain the right to move this house off of Dunkerhook Road, because the new property owner was threatening to tear it down, and move it just down the road to Bergen County Community College, who would agree to accept the house and have it reconstructed on the campus. But unfortunately, in the dark of night, as happens, the developer came in, tore the building down, and subsequently destroyed any archaeological remains associated with the building itself or anything in the backyard. So this site was lost. What we have today is one last remaining property. And this would have been the first property on the north side of those maps that still stands as not as it's originally was built, because it's been modified in terms of the architecture here, but there hasn't been any development on the property. And this is the family, the Bennett family from the African-American period. And it's currently owned by Ted and Joanne Manville. So that's where we get the Bennett Manville home. Ted and Joanne were part of the group trying to save the other house that was torn down. And so they were excited to have some archaeologists come to see if they had any archaeological deposits that were undisturbed in their backyard. And so along with Eric Johnson, who is a recent graduate student at Harvard, who spoke to you all a couple months ago about his research on wampum production in the 19th century. He and I initiated a phase 1 study, which grew into a phase 2 study to test this property to see if there was archaeological remains on the site. And in the end, we're able to identify 2 clusters of artifacts, which tell part of the story, which we'll work more with in the field school. This is a picture of Eric doing the field work. And the clusters are really great for archaeology. Just quickly showing you some examples. Cluster A included a 1x2 excavation unit, and it contained underneath and adjacent to some modern disturbance you see here, a good collection of mid-19th century artifacts that seem to be clearly related to the earlier generation of folks who lived at this site, the early families, the early Bennett families. And then in the area, let me go back over here, which is behind a modern garage, there is a rich deposit of what looks to be about turn of the 20th century material culture, including this really dateable McLaren's Imperial cheese milk glass jar, which is here shown in the field, sitting on my leg, as I can see that now as I took the picture. But it comes out better with the dirt to be able to read the molded maker's mark. As well as other artifacts that we think are telling us about sort of a turn of the 20th century period. So at the site already, we have a separation in the artifact deposits from mid-19th century to turn of the 20th century, which we can start to understand the household and understand how things changed through time for them as they lived as people of color in the 19th and into the early 20th century. So it already has a lot of promise. Then last fall, if I go back to the map, this is county-owned land. Outside of this, it's called the Dunkerhook area of Saddle River Park. We got permission to do some field testing there and tested in the lots. If I go back to one of the maps, find a helpful one. It tested behind these 2 properties, which would have been in the park today. And there are deposits that we were able to see with shovel tests that are worth going back and looking at. We'll also be doing a broader survey of the parkland, where there are some unidentified features sort of overlooking the Saddle River. They're probably not associated with the Black community here, but they might be. But we'll determine that by doing the field work this summer. So if I can come back, showing everything in, here's the flyer for the field school. May 24th to June 24th this summer. We'll be out there with a handful of students, mostly from Monclair State. As I said at the beginning, if anyone wants to come by and see what we're doing, feel free to send me an email. I'll check it and I'll see if we can find a time that works for you guys to come out and visit. We'll probably set up a public day for, so you don't have to make an appointment, but for now, feel free to contact me if you have any questions, or if you have any interest in participating in the field school in some way, please let me know. So thank you very much, everyone.